We are the Honeypot Fingerprinting team. I am Christopher. This is David, Victor, and Kayode. All right, so for today's agenda, we're going to start off by going briefly over what honeypots are, what they can do, and why they're important. And we're going to go into the dichotomy between low and high interaction honeypots and why that's important. We'll go over our project objectives and our diagram and topology. As far as the objectives go, honeypot fingerprinting is not an exact science, but today we want to show you some popular honeypots as well as some ways to fingerprint them. And we'll also go over some fingerprinting techniques and results. We have 3 of them. And at the end, we'll have time for Q&A from the audience.
Okay, so what are honeypots? I don't know. Okay. A honeypot is an information system or resource. It could be anything. It could be a service, a network service, a whole computer, network access point, any network device. There are even honeypots that mimic industrial control systems. So it's any information system or resource whose value, thank you, lies in unauthorized or illicit use of that resource. Because there's no production use of that honeypot, by definition, any activity on the honeypot is illicit activity. There it goes again.
Yeah, it just happens.
It just happens? Okay. There are many reasons you would use a honeypot. There's production. There it goes. It can be used in production, in a production environment, or it can be used for research. So monitoring new attack trends and attack signatures. Honeypots were first developed as an alternative to network to an IDS. Okay, a little bit of technical difficulty. Okay, so they evolved from an IDS, and now they make a good supplement or an addition to an IDS in your network for a couple reasons. First of all, an IDS, it requires attack signatures and malware signatures, heuristics of known attacks to throw off an alarm. Because of the definition of a honeypot, it has no production value. There are, by definitions, no false positives on a honeypot. And in a research implementation, it can actually help you detect and identify previously unknown attack signatures and malware. Okay? Another good reason why it's a functional alternative to an IDS is an IDS just throws an alarm when someone's already in your system. The honeypot can distract and deter intruders from your production resources, and in some cases even act as a tar pit and slow people down, so you have that time to react and hopefully protect your assets. So honeypots can be broken down into several categories, not on the slides. The first distinguishment is physical versus virtual. That's just basically if it's a physical or virtual machine. Everything's virtual these days. You have S3 Azure, so we didn't see that as an important distinguishment. So all our machines are virtual in our environment. What we saw as the most important distinguishment is the level of interaction that a honeypot has with the intruder. So a high interaction honeypot is the actual implementation of a system or service, okay? So an example of that is if you had an Apache web server with some vulnerabilities, put it out there, and just watched people try and attack it. So that gives you a very qualitative analysis of new attack patterns because you can really see what the intruder is doing. But with that comes a higher risk of exploitation. On the other side, there's the low interaction honeypot, which just simulates a system based on model behavior. And that's really only good for quantitative analysis. So the majority of attacks these days are just scripted, automated, unmanned attacks with no one really behind the wheel. So the low interaction honeypot is really designed for that. And because it doesn't give you access to the underlying operating system, it has a much lower risk of being exploited. But it's traditionally easier to fingerprint. And then the latest type of honeypot is the medium interaction. And that's actually closer to the implementation of an actual service, and that does it by application layer virtualization. If that's confusing, I'll try and explain it on this next slide. So here's the TCPIP model, right here, all the layers. The low interaction honeypot, it has that model behavior, so it's just the TCPIP responses. So that's at the middle 2 layers right there. Yeah. All right. The medium interaction honeypot, it's virtualizing the application, so it's starting to bring in the application layer. Bam. And then the high interaction is the actual implementation of the system or service. So if it's just a network service that's at the application layer, if it's the whole system, it's basically bringing in the all 4 layers. And that's, of course, all 4 layers are involved everywhere, but this is where the interaction is lying. So an analogy to understand that, if you're still having trouble, is if I didn't know a lick of Spanish, and someone just told me, when you hear gracias, you say de nada. So you hear gracias, I say de nada. I have no idea what any of that means. It's just what I'm told to respond with. That's the model. That's the model behavior of the low interaction honeypot. It's just the response, nothing else. Nothing's being processed, nothing. The medium interaction honeypot would be if I had a physical translator, or like Google Translate on my phone, and someone was talking to me, I was putting it through and giving them back what they said. So there's a little bit of distance. And then the high interaction is if I was just fluent in Spanish and I could just talk with the people, and then someone says something really stupid and I have that verbal diarrhea in my head. That's the disadvantage of a high interaction honeypot. Take it over.
So, because we're dealing mostly with low interaction honeypots, there's, as David already explained, there's that a balance to be achieved between risk and efficacy. Low interaction honeypots, with those, there's low risk involved, of an attack, but also the efficacy is low. And the higher interaction you go, the higher the risk of having an attack on your systems. And there's a trade-off between risk and efficacy. There's a balance to be achieved somewhere there. And as soon as we, all right. So our project objectives are to create an isolated network environment, populate that environment with honeypot systems, running simulated network services, and also control machines that run corresponding actual real systems that honeypots are running, and fingerprint those honeypots within the system, within the environment. And these are on the list here on the slide here, these are the honeypots that we chose to test. And we're going to talk in a little more detail later in the presentation about each honeypot and the services that we're running, HTTP, FTP, and SSH. And so this is our network diagram. You'll see on the left-hand side, the machines colored in red on the slides are the honeypot systems. We have 2 of them, and one's a Linux machine, the other one's a Windows. And on the right, there are the control machines. The green ones are the control machines, and the gray one at the bottom is the gray hat. And that's where all the fingerprint takes place from. It runs Kali Linux, which is a Debian distribution of designed for network security and forensics. So that runs. The control machines, one's a Windows, the other one's a Linux. The Linux runs CentOS, and again, those are running real services. The control machines are running real services corresponding to the simulated services on the honeypots, HTTP, FTP, and on the honeypot side, one's running Linux, the other one's also running Windows, FTP and HTTP also. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my partner to tell us more about what the honeypots are.
All right, now I'm going to briefly go over the honeypots that we're using for this project. The first one will be Honeyd. So Honeyd is a low-interaction honeypot, as are most of the ones we'll be going over today. It is similar to many honeypots in that it is open source, it is made for Linux, and it's command line driven. However, unlike most honeypots, this Honeyd is able to populate a network with other hosts running arbitrary services. It is also able to populate a subnet. Here's what it looks like in our project. You have several hosts here. Of note is that the services being run by the Honeyd itself, they're not actually being run. It's merely a simulation. And the IP addresses and MAC addresses of these hosts are merely being spoofed. The next honeypot that I'll go over is KFSensor. KFSensor is another low-interaction honeypot. But unlike other honeypots, this is a GUI. It's proprietary, and it's made by a company as opposed to an individual. This is made by KeyFocus, and it is currently being maintained. Unlike other honeypots, the issue with most honeypots is that it is run by an individual or several individuals, and because they're not charging for their services, it's open source, they run out of incentives, they move on to other endeavors, and they end up not supporting it anymore. Here, with KeyFocus, with that monetary incentive, they have a good reason to keep their product updated and keep it going. Also, this is Windows-centric, unlike many other honeypots that you would find. The final honeypot that we're going to go over is Kippo. Kippo is a medium interaction honeypot, which means that it has the best of both worlds, so to speak. It has the efficiency, the rich data that you can receive from a high interaction honeypot without the associated risk. So it is open source and it's command line like many other honeypots, but where it differs is that Kippo is exclusively SSH. It does simulate a terminal, an SSH terminal, in which an attacker would think that they have penetrated your system. They will run attacks just like any hacker would, except they're not actually in your system. They're in Kippo, and whatever their every move, their every attack, any malware that they try to download is being recorded by Kippo and can later be played back and analyzed.
So these are the fingerprinting techniques that we used. We'll go over each in detail as well as our results. Just a brief summary. First, we do service import analysis during our network reconnaissance phase. Then ICMP response timing is actually, we'll explain that, but it's only really works on Honeyd, and we got mixed results. We'll show you that in a moment. And then our last and most important fingerprinting technique is the service interaction, in which we're testing the modeled behavior and the modeled application layer virtualization of the honeypots we're testing. So service import analysis. Like I said, this is done during your network reconnaissance phase, and just this isn't so much a fingerprinting technique as more as it just throws red flags as to which systems and services you might want to look into further on your network. So what we're looking for is illogical and impossible combinations of services, disparities with other hosts on the same network. We're assuming in any network environment, all the machines are set up by the same person or the same team and under the same standards. So we're going to look for similar configurations, and anything standing out would throw up a red flag. And with that is too many or too few open ports. That can just give a red flag as to which honeypots are just kind of poorly configured. They'll stand out a little bit. So these are our two control machines. What we did is we just took the Linux control, the CentOS box, and the Windows server. We turned on IIS, so the FTP and the HTTP, and we installed VNC, SSH, HTTP as our control services, and didn't lock down anything else. It's just out of the box, what you'd find on if you installed CentOS and a couple extra services. So this gives you a good kind of baseline of what's going to be running on a system. So that's what you'd be looking for. You have some kind of remote access, HTTP and HTTPS, VNC. On your Windows, you have the random ports, I don't even know what they do, that you'll find on every Windows machine ever. So this is our port scan of KFSensor. Just to be clear, this is the out-of-the-box configuration of KFSensor. Since it's a GUI, if you just hit next, 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 you're done. This is what it's going to look like out the box. It's easy to turn these services off, but you have to do it. So this is just to show you an example of what way too many services and open ports looks like on a poorly configured honeypot. We have services running that do the same thing. We have some Linux services and some Windows services running on the same box. It just doesn't really make any sense, especially if you compare it to your controls. Looks a little different. The opposite is on Honeyd. Now, we just configured it kind of to show the other contrast. We just opened up only the ports we were running our services on, so 80 and 21, and that's way too few hosts, or too many open ports. That's way too few open ports, especially if you compare it to the controls again. But you'll see, even looking at that, you see port 80 open and not port 43. That's weird. You see port 21 open. There's no remote access to the server. There's no DNS running. There's nothing. It looks kind of fishy. With Honeyd, you build the configuration file from scratch. So you set an action for each port that you want open, closed, or filtered. So it's fairly easy, once you learn the syntax for Honeyd, to open up those extra ports, make it look a little bit more convincing. But you also attach a script, be it Bash or Python, that's your model behavior to each port. So if you have a port open, but no script attached to it, when you run a preliminary scan, it's going to show its open port. But if you run like a version scan on it with Nmap, it's going to show nothing. So you'd have to have at least write or use scripts that at least return a version, or else it's really pointless. And then lastly, our service and port analysis of Kippo. Now, Kippo is running on the IP of the Honey Drive machine. That's our Honeypot machine. It doesn't spoof a host. So if we just run a port scan, we see port 22, which is SSH. That's actually our real SSH server. We needed it. And then we had Kippo configured on port 1234. And this doesn't make a difference. We could have put Kippo on 22, and our real SSH, we could have moved to 1234. But when we run, and it shows up as hotline. So when we run a version scan, you see the real SSH, and it returns the version. And then on port 1234, instead of hotline, it shows a different SSH server running a completely different version. And that's going to also throw you up a red flag. Now with Kippo, you can change the configuration to return different versions. You can change it to return the different versions on the login banner when you SSH in. So you can configure that and make it match, but it's still kind of fishy if you have two ports open for an SSH server. There are some use cases for it, but it's uncommon. So again, seeing this would throw up another red flag and show you what you really need to look into more.
Thank you, David. Hello. Now we're going to show another technique called ICMP response timing. This technique is based on the concept that the host machine and the honeypot are sharing resources. So you're going to try to consume the resources from the host machine or the honeypot and see any difference on the response of the ICMP echo requests. I'm going to show an example here. This is on the step one, we're going to access the response time individually. So we're going to use a probe machine to execute some ping on each host separately. And in this case, we're going to do 500 ping requests and get back the average response time for those hosts. So we're going to repeat that for every host in the network. And as you can see, we got a nice result here. And in the second step, we're going to do the same thing, but with another flood request in another host. So we're going to repeat the experiment, but while doing that ping request, you're going to flood the other host. So when you do that, you get another response time back. And this is, we're going to repeat that for all hosts while flooding the other one. So when you are done with all the tests, we're going to have a table like that. And with that, we can establish some relationships. As you can see here, the response time on step 2 for host 2 while flooding host 3 is way above the response time gathering in step 1. And we can see the same thing happens for host 3 while flooding host 2. So this gives us a relationship between those two hosts. You cannot point out that host 2 or host 3 it's honeypot, but you can say that host 2 and host 3 have a host honeypot relationship. Our results on that fingerprint technique was not successfully because our implementation of Honeyd didn't respond well for the network reconnaissance. So here you can see we were trying to ping the hosts and they kept dropping. And we tried to tweak the Honeyd configuration. We redone the test we rebuilt our environment in a physical switch and physical machines, and that didn't work as well. So this is what happened. We kept duplicated packages and really huge response time. So that technique doesn't work for our experiment. For the next fingerprint technique, we're gonna talk about service interaction. Those low interaction honeypots are really based on transport, internet, and network interface layers. So they have model behavior for network interactions with those layers. And in this technique, we're gonna use application layer interactions to try to fingerprint those honeypots. So the tool that we used for this technique was Nmap script engine. It's an engine built in Nmap, so you can run different scripts written in Lua to try to do those kinds of tests. So some of the results, we used more than 26 NSA scripts, and we run that against all the hosts that we had on our network. And Honeyd and KFSensor doesn't have really good response on the application layer. We're gonna see that on the next slide. But Kippo, the medium interaction honeypot, could not be fingerprint using that technique. So this is our results for this fingerprint technique. As you can see here, this is a big table with all the scripts that we ran. So here we have the HTTP and FTP scripts, and here the SSH scripts. The green color represents the honeypots that were successfully fingerprinted. The yellow color represents the honeypots that didn't give us a really good response. It was a little bit off, but we could not pinpoint that's a honeypot or not. and the red represents that the honeypot gave us a really good response, really exactly like the control machines. As you can see here, Honeyd and KFSensor, you can see a lot of green and yellow. That shows that those honeypots fail to simulate real services. And as Kippo is only a SSH honeypot, it really got really good results on that fingerprint technique, and it was really nice, and it didn't show any indication that was a honeypot. So now I'm going to show 3 examples of honeypot scripts that we ran. 2 of those were successful. The last one was not. So this script here is HTTP date, and when you run that script, you get the date from the web server. So here is a real HTTP service. As you can see, after we run the script, we get the date and the difference from the local time. Here's the Honeyd honeypot. After we run that script, we see that this web server doesn't return any date. The next one, it's HTTP methods. This script show us the available methods that we can interact with that web server. So for the real HTTP service, we get the get, head, post, and options and trace methods. And this is the KFSensor response. We just have the port 80 open and no methods to interact with. So it doesn't make sense to have a web server with no methods to interact with. So this is a honeypot. Here's the last example. This is a script that enumerates all the encryption algorithms supported by the SSH service. Here's a real SSH service. As you can see, there's a lot of encryption algorithms here. And this is Kippo honeypot. As you can see, it shows some possible algorithms that you can use to interact with the service. So we fail to fingerprint using that technique. So, final considerations.
Okay. So just to wrap everything up, our final conclusions are, for the ICMP response timing, it only really applies to Honeyd because all the other services run on the host IP. Honeyd is the only one, again, that can create virtual hosts on a network. We just had unpredictable ICMP responses. We don't know if it was our configuration. We tried a bunch of different things. Like Victor said, we thought it was a problem with the virtual switch being too smart, so we couldn't spook the ARPs. So we tried a physical setup, similar results. Honeyd is a little bit old. It was stopped in 2009, so maybe it's just a little deprecated, but we couldn't really get it to react appropriately. For the service and port analysis, for Honeyd, we found that configuration isn't really trivial. It takes some time to set everything up, build a honeypot the way you like it. You have to build that configuration yourself. So it can be a little time consuming. And if there aren't scripts already available, when you install Honeyd, it comes with a good amount. But if you want to create something that's not there, it's going to take some time and some programming knowledge to make it react the way you want. For KFSensor, the out-of-the-box configuration has all services running, which is a perfectly valid configuration. If you just want to catch all those attack scripts, you want as many ports open as possible, use gimme, gimme, gimme. That works. But if you want it to be hidden and a valuable honeypot in a production environment, it's going to require some customization, but it's simplified by the GUI. For Kippo, you can modify the banner and version of Kippo, but if you really want to hide it, it might require disabling your real SSH access, because it's really not going to be possible to hide. And all of these service and port analysis are just assuming that you're not behind a NAT, because that would really change things up. So if your attacker's inside your network already. The service interaction was our best results. For Honeyd, we found very basic network responses, nothing at the application layer. That's just what a low-interaction honeypot is. For KFSensor, it did have a few application layer responses, more than Honeyd, but it was still pretty easily fingerprinted by the Nmap scripts. We think it had better application layer responses. This is just our guess because it is a proprietary product. People pay money for it, and it's constantly being updated. So because it's still being worked on, we think it has some better results. And for Kippo, because it is a medium interaction honeypot, it had excellent application layer responses. We couldn't really fingerprint it by the service interaction alone. So it did a really good job of that. But unlike the other Honeyd and KFSensor, Kippo only does SSH, whereas KFSensor and Honeyd are kind of jack of all trades. They can do everything, basically. So it is very specialized, but it gets good results.
So now we're gonna go over our demo. So for this demo, we're gonna have two. Where's the mouse? No, I took it off. Okay. So for this demo, we're gonna show attacker trying to break into Kippo, and he can get access, but he doesn't know he's on a honeypot. And we're gonna see the other side, how the host of the honeypot can see the attack being made. So let's start. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Sorry.
This is also an interesting video too, but we're not going to show it to you.
So the first step here, we're gonna do a little bit of network reconnaissance on that host. So we're gonna use the nmap -s capital V command and use that host machine to see what service, what version of service we have available on that machine. This command for this particular host took a little bit, took 2 minutes, so I'm going to cut off and just show the results. Here you can see the results. This is the real TCP port 22 SSH service, and here is the Kippo, the honeypot. As you can see, is a SSH service, a different version. So we have a machine with 2 SSH service running. And the second step now is to get the credentials using brute force on those 2 hosts. We're just going to use Medusa. It's a built-in tool on Kali. The parameters for that command is the host, the user that you want to try, log in, and the word list to brute force, the port, and the module. Now I'm going to use that command in the same host using the port that we acquired on the previous step, port 1234. This is our Kali machine, our attacker. For this Medusa attack, we're going to use the RockQ list. It's a built-in list on Kali, very good with normally used weak passwords. Here you can see we're using port 1234, and after we run, we got we found the for root, we found the the password 123456. Not a very good password to secure your, your server. So after that, we're going to attack the machine. We're going to SSH in using the command SSH. For this command, we have to specify the port because it's a different port. It's not the default 22 port. And we're going to use the password that we acquired on the previous step. Now I'm typing the password. So here it is. As you can see, we got access. We got our host here, root at server 03. So for the attacker, he could imagine that he got in. So he tries to see what kind of asset we are dealing with. So as you can see, this is the honeypot. It can take several commands like change the directory, list the directory. It looks like a Linux machine. And here I'm going to cat the password file. And as you can see, it's just behaves just like a Linux machine. Now I'm trying to execute GCC so I can download some malware, install on that, compile and execute on that machine. So I'm doing apt-get to install GCC. As you can see, looks like we are into a real server, Linux server. So after that I install, when I run GCC, I get this segmentation fault because the honeypot doesn't allow me to run the GCC. Now I do a wget on Google and get the index HTML file. I list the directory and I can see that index file was downloaded. Now I show the contents. I use pipe head, but as you can see, it shows the content but cannot pipe that command to another command. And now I'm frustrated. I don't want to deal with that anymore. I want to exit. And here, what happens? It says the connection to the server is closed and gives you this root at localhost, but you're still on the honeypot. So even if the attacker tries to exit, he cannot do that. So now you can fetch some extra info about your attacker. So this is still recording session. So everything is being logged on the honeypot, as we're going to see later. The command still works. I try to exit again. It gives me the same response. So now I'm trying to send kill signal to that terminal. And as you can see, it doesn't go out. It handles the kill signal to not let you go out. So now we're going to switch to the honeypot host machine. And we're going to replay the attack using a utility on that honeypot. As you can see here, this is our honey drive distribution machine. It's hosting Kippo. This is the Kippo folder. We're going to use the playlog.py and load the session that I just did. So here you can see this is the last session that happened. All the previous sessions are logged here. You can use this utility here and use this session as a parameter. After I execute that, I won't be typing anymore. This is this Python utility replaying the attack. As you can see, it's going to do the same stuff that I just did. So it's not me typing, just the host machine showing what the attacker did. So now this is going do the same stuff. Thank you very much for your attention. If you guys have any questions, feel free to watch the end of the presentation. And no questions? Okay.
Maybe I missed. I don't have that much knowledge, but when you get into the machine that you're attacking,
Yeah.
is there any like telltale signs that it is a honeypot? Like any easy way of telling, or is it just?
There are some ways, as I showed. When you are getting a command and piping through another command, that's already built in since, I don't know, Linux 001, and it doesn't work. And when you install GCC and you try to run, it gives you a segmentation fault. But even though the techniques that we use for this project could not fingerprint, we showed 3 techniques, and all 3 failed to fingerprint this specifically honeypot. But when you are into a machine, if you have a really basic knowledge of Linux and you try to interact with, you can see some stuff that are really off. So you can say, oh, there's something wrong with that server. So,
Real quick, was your question directed specifically at Kippo
No, it was just in general.
in general? The low interactions like Honeyd, you really can't get it in the machine. It's so basic. If you type in, because we have the web server running, if you try and get the web page, it'll show like a really basic web page, like site under construction, coming soon. Same thing with the FTP. You can log in, you can view the files that are there, but it's just pulling off like a text file with the file names and the size. If you try to do more, it's not going to give you much with the really low interaction. Kippo is the only one that you can really get in because it's this medium layer. It's like an SSH server, just not your SSH server.
Victor, the question that the gentleman asked, we're assuming that everybody knows Linux here. So when you sent the kill signal, they might not understand what kill signal is. I understand when you hit it did nothing, but explain to them what kill signal does and it might clear up.
yeah. Kill signal, when you have a terminal and you punch Ctrl+C, you're sending a signal to that process to shut down. And on the presentation, you see that it only returned a new line. So if it was a normal SSH process, when you send that, it would terminate the session. But this honeypot grabs that signal and don't let you go out. So it captures the attacker and you stay on that SSH session. Go ahead.
Do any of the honeypots do any reconnaissance on the attacker's machine?
Every network interaction up to TCP layer is everything logged out. So if you're doing network reconnaissance in every honeypot that we tested, you can see IP X try to connect here. MAC address X try to connect here. So on that, they don't have like alerts built in, but everything is logged. Every network interaction on those honeypots are really detailed and works really well.
It doesn't try to do a trace route or anything like that, or I don't know, anything else that you could possibly do, a port scan on the machine that's attacking, or?
It says the ports that's trying to reach,
Okay.
but it doesn't do a reconnaissance on the host.
Yeah,
You can use that as an input to do that.
It's not like doing reverse offensive security against that host.
Yeah.
That's up to you
Right.
to do next.
Yeah.
And to add to that, a lot of the open source don't have that built-in alert. You can kind of do your own thing. But because KFSensor is a commercial product, they have a lot of IDS functionality. So they can send you email alerts and that kind of thing. But it's still they don't do the reverse.
A comment and a question. On his question, it would be a good idea if you're running a honeypot like this to put deny hosts on your port 22 on your real port. I'm not sure if you're familiar with deny hosts, but it's an automatic blocker. And after a preset number of passwords, it blocks that host either permanently or for however long you want. The other question I had on Kippo is, you showed an SSH session. What happens when they try SFTP?
It doesn't have a SFTP service available.
So that would be an indicator to them that something was off.
Yeah, it's not a real server. It's just it's running on the host machine. It uses the IP of the host machines. When you when you do a reconnaissance, you just see that added service with all the host machine service. If that machine has a FTP service, you can try to breaking that service, but will not be Kippo's service. Okay.
I mean, that's a when you're saying Kippo is pretty well hidden, an attacker would first try to go with SSH, and so they try to download GCC and install it. That didn't work. So the next thing they would do is they log out or close the window since they can't exit. And then they would go in and try to do an SFTP session to upload their miner, their attack miner. And that would fail, and then they know, oh yeah, this is a honeypot, because every time you open a port for SSH, you get SFTP.
Yeah. It's a good one. Any more? Okay. Thank you very much, guys.